and they were screaming back and forth. One side would say, trans rights are under attack. And the other side would say, what do? We fight back. But I didn't think anything of it. I thought it was just kind of a silly chant. But all of a sudden, after I'm done speaking, we wrapped up. People were standing up to leave. Ambush.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to this edition of the LOOPcast. I'm joined by a very, very special guest, a very fast swimmer, a very brave woman. Today, I'm joined by Riley Gaines. Riley, thanks for joining the show.
Of course. Thank you so much for having me on.
Of course.
Except I call myself a swimmer now. I'm too old to speak swimmer.
Wow. I still think you could be a swimmer. I think you could beat me in a pool. Let's just put it that way. So Riley, you obviously had quite the altercation at San Francisco over the weekend, but I was hoping to actually go a little bit to the beginning of your story and just get everything in totality. So you started swimming at a very young age. You're one of the best swimmers in Tennessee, high school history, from what I understand. What was that first moment where you knew, hey, I really want to do this swimming thing? Like, I have something going on here.
So I played lots of sports growing up, but I started to notice at age like 12 or so, middle school, that I was pretty good at swimming. When I was 12, this was the first time I ranked first in the nation. And so I was oblivious at the time. I just went in every day, did what I could, did as well as I could, went home, didn't think about it. But I started having other parents come up to my parents or other swimmers come up to me and say, you're like really good. You should really consider like making this your only sport. At the time, I was like, no, I want to play softball. I want to play basketball, all the different things. But by the time I got to high school, I decided it was time to stick just to swimming just because it took up so much time. And so I was very fortunate to be pretty heavily recruited. And I knew I wanted to stay in the SEC. I'm sorry, I'm biased. I think the SEC is the best conference. My dad, he was an SEC football player. My mom, she played Division I softball. And so I knew I wanted to stay here close to home. And I eventually committed to the University of Kentucky, where I had a phenomenal experience.
That's awesome. And when I was doing a little bit of research, I mean, you have tons of accolades. You had a great career at Kentucky. But what really stuck out to me was there was steady improvement. And by the time you reached your senior year, you really seemed to have fully realized your potential, put all the technique things to work. And so you head into the NCAA finals for swimming, really almost like this should be your year. You're fully realized, this is my year, senior year, I'm going to get it done. And then at the same time, there's a swimmer kind of rising the ranks suddenly out of nowhere from Penn. I'm referring to Leah Thomas here. And it almost seemed to me in the research that you guys were kind of coming to a head in a strange way. Was that on your mind as you went into the finals that, oh, this is my year, but this weird thing's happening? Was it a distraction? Did you think it would be a big deal?
Totally, it was a distraction. I think a lot of the listeners know swimming is not a sport that garners a lot of media attention. But there was so much media attention around this meet, which was new to us. It was a total distraction from what we dedicated not just our entire lives, but that specific year, my senior year. This was my last swim meet ever. I knew I had to give it all at this meet, but it was a distraction. It was totally like you couldn't even focus on yourself. Of course, we had physically prepared all year, but like most sports, there's a lot of mental preparation that goes into competing well. But I felt like our mental preparation was severely hindered, not just because we knew we were going to be competing against a male, which of course feels like you're competing with your hands tied behind your back, but also the locker room piece. When you're in the locker room undressing next to someone who is fully equipped with and exposing male genitalia, it was, for lack of a better word, almost traumatic. I mean, of course, it felt like betrayal and belittlement, but
yeah,
it just was distracting. Yes,
for sure. And I'd imagine before a competition you spent a lot of time preparing for. Was there a heads up given to you, like, hey, you're going to be changing in the same room as biological man? Was that ever prepared for?
Never. The NCAA never once told us we would be sharing this locker room space. We had to find out with our own eyes. And again, excuse me. And again, a swimming locker room is not a place of modesty necessarily. These suits you put on, they're so tiny and you have to squeeze and pull yourself into them. And it takes about 15 minutes to put these suits on, 15 minutes of which you're fully exposed. And so I can't even describe the feeling when you're undressing in the locker room. A male walks in, drops his clothes, fully exposed. It's this subconscious feeling, this innate feeling to want to cover yourself. It's embarrassing, it's awkward, it's uncomfortable. And I know I mentioned it. It just felt like betrayal. It felt like the people who were supposed to be protecting us, the NCAA, our coaches, our parents, no one was doing so. Granted,
Yeah.
we're adults. I know we were 8 to 22 years old, but it still felt like there was the people who were supposed to be doing their jobs weren't.
Yeah, absolutely. And it did almost feel like betrayal in the pool as well. We actually had someone from CatholicVote protesting on the ground. We had a sign made for you. I remember the lead up to that event. Everything about it just felt so wrong. And interestingly, when I was doing research again, I noticed that your website is full of Bible quotes and you're very open about your Christian faith. And one moment really stuck out to me. It said on your website that before that race, you prayed to God for focus and strength and that his will be done. And then that day, you statistically tie Leah Thomas in, I believe, the 200 free. And for people who aren't super into swimming, that's really rare, right? I mean, you have all these sensors that go
No,
off. The fact that you tie him is just unbelievable, kind of setting you up for this big moment where you're going to be on the podium at the same time. Did you feel while it was happening or after it happening, that God's hand was somehow in this, that this was no mistake, that you would have this rare tie?
absolutely. I mean, the whole thing couldn't have been, I say perfect. It's obviously not perfect, but more perfect for his plan. It couldn't have laid itself out better to have a conversation about this. Not only did we tie, which again is rare, and I think our times were both 1 minute, 43 seconds and 52 100ths or whatever it was. And so we go behind the podium where the official looks at both Thomas and myself and he says, "Hey, you guys tied, but we don't really account for ties. So Leah takes the trophy home." And I, of course, was taken aback by this, but I asked him, okay, I understand we tied. I understand there's one trophy, but why are you giving this trophy to Leah? And the official says, "Well, Leah has to take the trophy for pictures. You can pose with this one, but you'll give it home. You go home empty handed, or you'll give it back. You go home empty handed. Leah takes the trophy home." And so I say that because that also feels like God was just moving through that situation to perfectly highlight what is wrong here and how women are being harmed. Because what this was this official reduced everything that not just myself, my teammates, the other girls at this meet, everything we'd worked our entire lives for. It was reduced down to a photo op to validate the feelings of a male.
Wow. And I think what stuck out to me as an observer, I mean, I could only imagine the betrayal and the hurt going on in that podium. So many girls, you could just see almost like a put on smile, like they weren't sure how to act or they'd offend someone. And I think what's been so inspirational
Totally.
about your story is you decided to speak out. But right when it happened, what on the ground, how did it feel like being with other people who are at the absolute top of their sport, at the top of their craft, and feeling like you all pretty much had a gag on your mouth? Is that how it felt? Like you just weren't sure how to act?
Absolutely. No, absolutely. I know I'm one of the few voices out there for female athletes but from someone who directly experienced this. But why that is because look at what just happened in San Francisco. No one wants to subject themselves to that, to an angry mob calling them names. Of course, that takes a sense of security, which I find my sense of security in my faith. And so I'm alone, it seems, but I'm not alone. I speak for so many when I share when use even words like how I felt. It's not really just how I felt; it's how we felt. We as female athletes, my teammates, my team at the University of Kentucky, we had 40 girls, and 38 felt the exact same way I do. Um, it was just walking around the pool deck that first day. The mood didn't feel right. This is the fastest short course meet in the world. Um, Yet there was this sense of anger and frustration, and there was grumbles and whispers under people's breath. because we were mad, we were frustrated, we were heartbroken. It was a feeling of just like you had been punched in the gut when you have to watch a man stand on top of the podium, beating out Olympians, beating out American record holders, beating out the most impressive female swimmers this country has ever seen. It was a feeling as if you'd been slapped in the face by the NCAA, by the people who were supposed to be enforcing Title IX.
So you do eventually speak out. And an interesting element to the story too is University of Kentucky kind of pops in again. I think from what I understood, and I want to hear more about this, you were able to speak out with the support of University of Kentucky, and that was actually kind of a rarity. So why do you think that you were able to do so when so many other schools didn't support their swimmers in speaking the truth of how they felt?
And, I totally resort this back to God because my whole time growing up, I thought I was going to be a Florida Gator. I really only took a trip to Kentucky because my boyfriend at the time, he likes UK. And I said, okay, I'll take us I can go on a recruiting trip there and we can go to a basketball game. Like that's something a really cool girlfriend would do. But I fell in love with the university. They weren't a good swimming school at the time. It was nowhere on my radar. Again, I could have, in the vein of being totally transparent, I could have gone anywhere in the country I wanted to go to swim. But I chose UK. And looking back, it was the perfect place for me. After all this, I called my athletic director and I said, hey, this is what happened. This is how we feel. I'm no longer, I can't keep lying because that's what this is. We weren't standing in the truth. We were lying. I said, I can't keep feeling like I'm lying. How do you feel if I take a public stance on saying that it's wrong? And he said, Riley, we love you. I support you. I want you to speak your heart. Stay true to your convictions. He said, I would support you with whatever stance you took, but don't feel like you're going to paint this university in a bad light. We're behind you. And I just kind of hung up and thought nothing of it because I thought that's how any athletic director would act. But oh my gosh, was so naive and wrong because there is no other athletic director, administrator, president of a university who has taken that approach. None. And it shows how they're cowards. It shows how they lack a backbone. There's no authenticity. There's no leadership because privately, I have so many messaging me telling me they feel the exact same way and they support me and they're proud of me and to keep fighting. And I asked them, why won't you say this publicly? Oh, well, we don't want a lawsuit. We can't risk our jobs. We have families we have to feed. I'm the breadwinner, so I can't really say it publicly. And at first I felt so humbled and honored when people would message me privately. But very quickly I realized this is an honoring experience. This just shows how silence is complicity and these people are all complicit in allowing women to lose out on opportunities.
Wow. And your message has inspired so many. So you're actually the star of CatholicVote's most viral video clip, I think, of all time. And CatholicVote's been around since 2005, and we've done some things. But so there's a video on Twitter that has been seen by 6.6 million people as of right now on Twitter.
Wow.
It garnered a comment from Elon Musk. It was retweeted by James Woods and a lot of other really major accounts. James Woods called you the woman of the year, which I think I tend to agree. The video I'm talking about was actually you testifying in Virginia to the House subcommittee. And it was the most heartbreaking and honest and raw speech. Do you remember how you felt on that day and what gave you the courage to go on such a public forum and just start pouring out the truth?
Absolutely. I remember how I felt. It felt, you just feel helpless. Which again, I know I'm an adult. I know I'm old enough to not have this false perception of needing someone else to protect me. But you just felt so, like I mentioned in the competition piece, you felt like your hands were tied behind your back. This was a mediocre male swimmer. He was ranked 462nd at best amongst the men. Of course, when transitioning to female, dominated, beat everyone. And it just felt so frustrating that the NCAA didn't see it how I saw it. Nothing opinionated, nothing hateful. The facts of it. This was someone who went from mediocre to dominating. So that was my feelings: heartbreak, anger, frustration. There was a lot of different feelings. And truthfully, I felt my feelings shift because I did come into it angry But that first day when I watched, actually her name is Reka, she swam at Virginia Tech. Um, I watched her place 17th in the morning of the 500, meaning she didn't make All-American. She didn't make it to come back because top 16 make it to come back in some finals. And so she missed it by one place. She was displaced, of course, by Leah Thomas. And she looked at me. I didn't know her at the time. We were just standing next to each other. And she looked at me with tears in her eyes and grabbed my hand and said, I just got beat by someone who didn't even have to try. And that's when my feeling shifted to gutted. I just felt like I was heartbroken. But what's given me the courage to speak out, I know I've mentioned my faith, but truthfully it has. And there's been lots of prayer that has gone into this. And the hardest comments I received, especially initially, people would call me, they would say, why didn't you just swim faster? Or why didn't you train harder? Or you're ugly, or whatever personal attack they want to throw my way. And I was cool with it. That just to me shows their insecurities more than it does mine. But I would get comments that would say, you call yourself a Christian, but this isn't what Christ would do. Our God loves all. And I struggled with that at first because, of course, I know our God loves all. But I really struggled with the thought of doing something that wasn't Christ-like because before anything, I want to live a Christ-like life. But I realized that was Satan trying to silence me. But after prayer and, of course, again, talk with my different youth pastors at my church and different people who I value their input, I realized our God, of course, loves all, but he's a God who hates sin, and our God made man and woman, and he doesn't make mistakes. So my faith has definitely been a proponent, but also just thinking about the girls who are silenced. I mentioned my story, and I mentioned how rare that is. I could talk about the silencing piece that these other female athletes are facing, and it's chilling to think about how these universities are able to suppress their voices as they are. But then I also think about the women who fought for Title IX. My grandma's generation, these were women who, in their same lifetime, they're seeing the benefits of Title IX, and now they're seeing that being taken away. So I fight for them, and of course, I fight for the next generation. I have a little sister. She's the Tennessee state champion in gymnastics. She's probably the best athlete of my whole family. And I fight for her. I just got married, and I can only hope one day I get to have a daughter. And I can't imagine being in the position I'm in, having the platform I have, and the experience and the testimony that I have, and not using that to fight for her rights. And so there's kind of a lot of different thoughts because I'm done playing. It's not for me anymore. This is a lot bigger than me. I'm not fighting for my rights in sports. You couldn't
Yeah.
pay me to do a fifth year of swimming. But it's a lot bigger than.
This element of injustice just keeps coming back. And I think one thing that I could see just being so frustrating to you is other women. In this case, there was just an altercation between you and Megan Rapinoe, who played soccer for the United States, in which she is attacking you for standing up for women as a woman.
Yeah.
And so a few things come to mind here. You've been so effective online, and I see you as a part of this future of leaders who have kind of had to respond to a world gone a little crazy, in being concise and in sometimes confrontational in a good way, because injustice and evil needs to be confronted. So can you so your response there I thought was so good and so honest at the same time. Could you just run us through what was going through your head when you responded? I'm sure how frustrated you must have been to see that tweet.
Absolutely. So there's a slew of athletes who, majority of these athletes are done playing. They're done playing sport. Who have signed on to a almost as if a petition to oppose these state bills going around that are preventing anyone who has gone through male puberty from playing on women's teams. They opposed that. And so I was looking at this list and I was trying to find something in common with these women who signed on to this. These were women who were successful in their sport, yet they want to take away other women's success and their opportunities and their dreams to achieve. And so I'm looking, and something I notice with a lot of these women, of course, like I mentioned, they're done playing. It's, why not be seen as inclusive when you don't have to lose out?
Yep, no skin in the game.
Exactly. And two, a lot of these women are in the position where it's unlikely they will have children because they're not in a heterosexual relationship. That's not to say that lesbian women can't adopt or inseminate in other ways. But I think it's important to highlight that these women, a lot of them don't have daughters to defend. They, exactly like you just said, there's no skin in the game. There's no, um, it's just virtue signaling. They want to be seen as kind and inclusive and accepting and welcoming and loving and all of the things. But in reality, again, from my own personal experience, it is not kind to put a man in a woman's locker room. And it is not inclusive to allow a man to take opportunities away from women. It's exclusive. It's not anything that is progress. This is not moving in the forward direction. This is taking us back in time. And so I think it's a bit hypocritical, and there's a lot of irony to it because these women call themselves feminists, but I call them vote because they're not actually fighting to protect women's rights. They're fighting to take them away.
I think what takes you on to the next step is I've seen a lot of clips of you going to colleges and giving speeches. And speaking of inclusion and lovingness and welcome, you didn't really receive much of a welcome or inclusion from San Francisco State. But before you get into what happened there, how did you get from speaking out publicly against what happened in the pool to now going around and giving speeches at colleges, testifying in front of subcommittees? There's been a lot of wins, legislative wins, in terms of keeping biological men out of biological women's sports, which is amazing. I'm sure you're a part of that. So how did you get on the speaking tour?
My life trajectory has totally changed, first of all. I graduated last year with the intent of being in dental school this year. I'm clearly not working on teeth. So it's taken a turn. But once I spoke out and once it was proven I was one of the few to do so, um, the media just loved it. A lot of course, right-wing media. They Fox News, Newsmax, CPAC, all of the different things. They wanted me to continue talking about it, and I, of course, initially did. But then I started to feel like I was preaching to the choir. All of these people agree with me. I need to get people who don't agree with me. And so that's when I started reaching out to left-leaning sites. I started reaching out to CNN and MSNBC and a lot of local left-leaning sites, to which every single one of them responded back to me with, "We don't want to give you a platform to spread your hate." And so this was really hard for me, but this was the first time I was eye-opened to how the media works and how politics, not that sports should ever be political, but it was inevitable it would go this way, and how politics work. There was such a divide and such a misunderstanding of the message. There's still obviously a misunderstanding of the message I'm trying to communicate. It's not out of hate. I have so much compassion in my heart for every person. I love even the mob I was met with in San Francisco. I've been praying for them. So it's not out of hate. So there's a misconception here. And so I realize the only way changes are going to be made is through policy. At least at the legislature level, there has to be some things done, put in place, so this doesn't keep happening. And that's when I started totally out of my own pocket, out of my own will, testifying in different states, traveling to these different states, providing my perspective, just like the video you saw in Virginia. I've probably been to 12, maybe more different states and testified. And so a lot of it was self-determination. Like I mentioned, this was not where I thought I was going to be this time, even last year. But I believe God puts you in a place at the time he needs you in that place. And that's what I think this whole thing really is with me being here, continuing to talk about it.
We're going to get into it now, San Francisco. So one thing that crossed my mind as we were talking a little bit sooner, when I heard we were actually supposed to do this interview a little bit sooner for the listeners, and you said, "Oh, my flight got delayed. I'm going out to San Francisco State University. Can we push it to next week?" And of course, I was happy to oblige, but in the back of my head, I was like, "Oh gosh, San Francisco State University. Talk about the Lion's Den. I hope you're okay. It's a best of luck. I really hoping everything goes well." And so when you went into that, did you have any indication this was going to be different than other times you spoke at schools?
Yeah, I definitely knew what I was getting into. But again, I want to reach the people who don't agree with me. And so I knew they were planning some different things on campus, including different sign making events where they could make signs to protest me. or they had planned to sit in. So lots of protesters came to the event and they sat and they listened. And they had written signs and all the things, which I'm fine with. I believe in everyone's right to protest and think independently. I can only do my job to help eye open as much as I can and change perspectives, but I can't force anyone to change their mind. And so I encourage them to be there. I encourage questions at the end, to which I was asked many. And the speech portion went fine. There was some heckling, but for the most part, it was good. But it was after the speech where I was totally ambushed. Um, it felt like I could hear people screaming in the hallway during my speech, and I could hear people screaming outside the building. They were screaming things. So obviously the hallway, there was one group of people on this end and another group at the other end of the hallway, and they were screaming back and forth. One side would say, "Trans rights are under attack," and the other side would say, "What do? We fight back." But I didn't think anything of it. I thought it was just kind of a silly chant. But all of a sudden, after I'm done speaking, we wrapped up, people were standing up to leave. Ambush. A mob filters in through the door. They flicker the lights. They turn out the lights. They rush me. They push forward. They push. They shove. They begin hitting. And I was so shocked by this. I had no idea what to do because I was supposed to meet the campus police an hour and a half before the event, but the police never showed up to where we were supposed to meet. And so there was no action plan set in place. And so a woman comes up and she's grabbing me, telling me, "Come on, I'm with the police." But I didn't believe her because she was wearing nothing that indicated she was with the police. She had her face covered with the mask. And so I was kind of resisting going with this lady, but I realized I had no other choice. And so we get pushed along, and finally we get out into the hallway to where, again, being ambushed from both sides of the hallway. So we had to filter into another classroom building along that hall, where ultimately I was barricaded for 3 hours.
And they, I believe, were requesting like a ransom style payment. Is that correct?
It's so crazy because, of course, in this 3 hours that I was in this room, I could hear them yelling the entire time just outside the door, yelling violent, yelling obscene, awful things, yet again, doing it in the disguise of love, doing it in the disguise of saying that I'm the one being hateful. I'm the one with violence in my heart. They loved to
That
say
is an
that, which I
unbelievable
truthfully
take.
just I just didn't understand. I was like, "Wow, okay." But yeah, in this time, I was supposed to have a flight back home. I missed my flight because I couldn't safely leave the building. They were negotiating with the dean of students. They said, this is word for word what they said. "If she got paid to be here, we deserve to be paid to let her go home safely." Which, first of all, the university did not pay me to be there. But yet they felt like they needed reparations for me simply a conservative speaker being on their campus. They were owed money. It just blew my mind, and the dean of students was sitting there, like, negotiating with them, talking this out, and I just didn't understand. I'm like, I'm stuck behind this door, wanting to go home, yet I have people on the outside who, in the disguise of love, are trying to say I can only go home safe if I pay them? It just was so messed up.
Yeah. And so, as an observer of this situation and just seeing all of your activism, it's so, I almost want to even dispel the idea that what they're doing is out of love or somehow loving. The obvious to me is that you are a brave, poised, beautiful young woman who is charging into the absolute worst of situations in places you know where you're going to see adversity, and the people there are screeching. They look terrible. They're threatening. It's such an obvious good and evil situation, and I
Totally.
guess for your from your perspective, did you feel like with the people that are out there yelling at you, you somehow felt in your heart that you need to pray for them, which I know Jesus asked us to do, and it's hard for me sometimes. Do you think that what you're doing is going to be able to potentially plant a seed in them? Like, do you see any hope or optimism for them to potentially change their ways or see what's really going on in the situation? Or even some students that you spoke to, do you feel like you were able to inspire or plant some seeds there, or was it just a total, mess of a time?
There were some students who were relatively eye-opened. Of course, I think a lot of them show up with the only thing they know about me is they read the headlines, which these headlines are called, they say anti-trans swimmer slams Leah Thomas or something of that nature, which again, I'm not anti-trans, I'm pro-woman. My argument is pro-fairness. It's not anti-trans. I believe people who identify as trans should be able to compete, but with your biological sex or in a separate category to where fairness, safety, and privacy are ensured for everyone. So I'm not anti-trans. And so I think when people hear me talk about my experience, see how real it really was for me, and for, again, my teammates and the other girls at that meet, they realized that. I had a couple people came up afterwards and the seconds before I was ambushed. One person who was trans gave me a note, and it was a pretty kind note. And so I do believe, even a few weeks ago, I went to Cal Berkeley and spoke. And a lot of people on that campus came into it with the wrong mindset. But I even had one girl who came up to me afterwards, and she was on an athletic team at University of California, and she said, you know, I came into this thinking as a lesbian, she was lesbian. She said, as a lesbian, I have to advance the LGBTQ community. She was like, but you made me realize that I don't really want to see male parts of the locker room either. And so she was like, you've totally opened my eyes to how this is harmful to women. And so I believe there are people who just need to hear it from someone who lived it, from someone who saw firsthand what it really looked like, not just the media headlines. But that being said, I do believe there are some people who, no matter what, won't change their mind, which I'm one of those people. No matter what kind of argument you put in front of me at this point, I will not back down from the fact of saying that women deserve equal opportunity and they deserve sex protected spaces.
As you
And of
should.
course, there are people on the opposing who won't change their mind. So it's just finding the people who will, being respectful in a way that you can talk to them with open dialogue and conversation and not be, I think what we see so much in our, again, political system, there's so much divisiveness. There's so much, really just extremism on both sides to where people aren't willing to have a conversation, but we have to have that conversation to get people to understand our perspective. And so I'm trying my best to be that person in some capacity without faltering from my morals, which is something I'm not willing to do.
And I'm glad you're okay. And I think to wrap up, we have a lot of people in this audience. Hopefully, we have some new people listening that really like to get involved in very practical ways. And I think one thing that you've kind of revealed is that if you stand to your principles and you're smart and you make good, smart confrontations while being respectful, you can be effective. And I think so many people feel kind of bludgeoned by what is kind of being coined woke ideology in many parts of their lives, in their workplace, in their athletic competitions for their kids, even in some places, their churches. And so, what advice would you give to someone who feels kind of oppressed, or not kind of, feels oppressed by this, but is nervous about speaking out or doesn't know exactly what to do? What would you say to them?
My advice is, truthfully, the overwhelming majority of people, not just athletes, not just females, people in general, the general public, regardless of where you are. Again, there are so many, even liberals, people within the LGBTQ community, of course, all the people on the right agree that this whole transgender ideology movement has been harmful. It's harmful specifically to women and to children. And so I think feeling comfortable enough to um, express really how you feel. We see too many people hold back a little bit, or they read the room before they say anything. And I'm not telling you to go out and talk about it all the time, but when it comes up, feel comfortable in saying that this is harmful to women and children specifically. Um, Contacting your local representatives, I think it's so important that you know where your state stands, especially on the Fairness in Women's Sports bill. At the state level, it's so important. There have been 20 states thus far that have passed this bill. Um, that means there's 30 more that need to have it passed. So knowing how your representatives represent you and represent the majority, again, of its district, crucial. And I think three, the language you use to talk about it, I know we mentioned it, but what I've seen going to these different states and testifying, what the opposition likes to do is make it about humanity, make it about so emotionful, make it about one's life depending on it. But what people don't consider is the emotions behind the other side. You know, who's considered our mental health or our feelings or dignity or privacy or safety or fairness? No one. And that's a conversation that we don't really have. But there's more than one group um, being put in a vulnerable position here. And so then raises the question, how do we pick one group's mental health or self perception or feelings to matter or value over another group's or person's? And there's no clear answer for that. But right now, what we're seeing is we're catering to the minority with at the expense of the majority. And so talking about it in a way of making our side have emotion as well, because I promise you we do. And so that's my advice. I'm trying to think of more ways for people to get involved and what that kind of looks like. Obviously, I know you mentioned Megan Rapinoe and Sue Bird. They signed a petition. And so I'm thinking of creating a petition um, and getting people to sign on to show, again, that this is the majority, even if they want to do so anonymously. It's important to show how many people truly feel the exact same way in which both you and I are speaking.
Yeah, and I'd be happy to link that in the show notes for us here. Uh, Riley, thanks again for coming on. You're a personal inspiration to me and also to so many people in our audience here. And I just want, if there's ways that we can help you and your mission and your charge here, what is the best way for people listening now that want to help you out? What can they do?
Absolutely. I think following along with my Twitter, which is Riley_Gaines_, um, the past year, I've been trying to do a really good job of post breaking stories of this happening to other athletes because my story is not unique by any means. It's actually happening at rampant rates around the country. And so I try and post relevant things in regards to sports, relevant different companies that highlight men in place of women, different representatives who either do a good job of something in this space or a bad job in this space. Just trying to, I hate using the word educate because it makes me sound like total activist, but just trying to educate the general public who wouldn't typically see these things on what's going on. And so I think following along on Twitter, it's Riley_Gaines_ is a good way. I'm also now working for the Independent Women's Forum. And so if you go to www.iwf.org, they have lots of resources, lots of links, lots of scientific articles, just lots of really amazing things on their site as well.
Okay. And we will definitely have both linked. Riley, thanks again for coming on, and you're always welcome back.
Of course. Thank you so, so much.